the SPM but better. How should we define and measure poverty today? By Elia Weber, Berkeley Milam, and Gabby Hattar.
In order to define poverty in America today, we should use a modified version of the SPM.
So what is the SPM? The SPM, or Supplemental Poverty Measure, is an additional poverty measurement used by the U.S. Census Bureau, but it is not preferred. This measurement examines the resources of households by measuring their income and then adding government non-cash benefits. This includes both in-kind benefits, like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which provides food benefits to supplement in grocery shopping, and near-cash benefits, like child tax credits. The SPM also considers non-discretionary spending and subtracts this from income. This would include expenses that are not optional, such as transportation to and from work or childcare. Another important non-discretionary expense is MOP, medical out-of-pocket expenses. So now that we know how to measure the resources of households using SPM, we need to examine the thresholds. SPM begins by examining food, shelter, clothing, and utilities, or FCSU. The SPM takes a large selection of data points and finds the median between homes that spend the most on FCSU and homes that spend the least. We then take 83% of the median and multiply it by 1.2. This is intended to add wiggle room for nicer products in some areas and spending on items outside of the necessities. The FCSU median is readjusted for the composition of the household based on whether or not people live together and pool resources. In our measurement, individuals who are in poverty are those below this threshold that we calculate using the FCSU when taking into account their benefits and income.
The pros of the SPM. The SPM has numerous benefits that other measurements of poverty do not have. One such example being that the SPM considers a large variety of factors. As previously mentioned, the SPM considers not only income, but also accounts for non-cash government benefits that an individual receives along with other extraneous expenses that may affect any given individual. Another great benefit of the SPM is that, unlike the OPM, it factors in diverse family structures. Adapting to a more modern living, the SPM has been able to calculate income regarding those who may not be blood or legally related, however provide monetary benefits or strains to the household. This is especially useful with tracking couples who live together but are not married, referred to as cohabitating couples. This aids in providing a more accurate look at a given home's financial situation and allowing for proper aid to be applied. The OPM is not designed to do this due to differing structures being uncommon when it was first created. Lastly, the SPM adjusts according to an individual's broad geographical location. The SPM recognizes that it is important to consider where someone is living in order to compare their purchasing power. SPM's limitations. While the SPM provides a strong baseline measurement as a poverty metric, it has several limitations that need to be addressed. One limitation is that the SPM fails to account for the value of financial aid related to health and medical expenses without insurance. As a result, individuals without health insurance must pay all of these costs out of pocket, reducing their overall purchasing power compared to those who receive government aid. This creates inequities across the population, drawing a divide between those with insurance or government assistance and those without, and ultimately penalizing the latter. Furthermore, the SPM does not fully capture costs of SCSU across different geographic locations, and it is especially limited when adjusting rent prices by geography, since the areas that SCSU are calculated for are very broad. Lastly, it does not consider individuals with chronic illnesses who are disproportionately impacted by the cost of additional needs. Instead, the SPM makes broad assumptions about the cost of housing, FCSU, and healthcare expenses.
With our knowledge of the SPM and its drawbacks, we can alter it. One difference in our improved SPM would be taking measures to extend what is considered non-discretionary spending. People who are uninsured are not included in the subtracted medical out-of-pocket expenses. For those who do not have insurance provided for them through Medicare or a job, the FCSU should be recalculated to consider what costs out-of-pocket medications and hospital visits would be. Finding an average of these costs based on family size and location would allow for the FCSU to be adjusted to include this extra expense. Housing costs should also vary further based on location. FCSU should be altered to more seriously consider cost of living differences in each area. Instead of comparing FCSU in larger areas, it should be shrunk further so as to include what rental prices are like between suburbs and a rural area, for example. One way to assist in recalculating FCSU in smaller areas would be by including fair market rental, FMR, in the measurement. By examining what amount of an individual's FCSU is spent on housing, we could then use the FMR from different areas and adjust to a new location. If we have little data on the cost of FCSU in Blacksburg, Virginia, but we have a lot of data on the cost of FCSU in Danville, Virginia, we can section off the amount of money spent on housing at the median and replace it with the FMR. This would allow for more fair purchasing power comparisons between people who pay for the cost of rent in Blacksburg, Virginia versus Danville, Virginia. The cost of food can also vary wildly across the United States, with their transportation costs for fresh produce making a large difference. Shrinking the areas in which FCSU is calculated would minimize the distortion. Additional consideration should also be given for households being measured by the SPM that contain individuals who have medical conditions that require certain goods. If an individual in a household needs a particular diet due to a condition and those foods are more costly, their FCSU would be higher. An additional cost should be averaged for special diets, housing accommodations for those with disabilities, equipment that is needed for recovery but not covered under insurance, and other needs. This should be considered as part of the subtracted involuntary costs. The capabilities approach. The capabilities approach is a theoretical framework for defining and measuring poverty, first introduced by the economist philosopher Amartya Sen in 1979. It was developed with flexibility and universal applicability in mind, assessing individual well-being, social circumstances, and access to opportunities through two major measures, functionings and capabilities. Sen defines functionings as the actual beings and doings a person achieves, while capabilities are the beings and doings a person could achieve if they chose to. For example, a capability would be having the physical ability to eat and food available, while the functioning would be the act of eating. It is important to differentiate because someone may have the ability to eat but choose not to. Conversely, someone may lack the capability to eat because they do not have access to food. By capturing people's abilities, not just their income, contentment, or access to resources, we gain a clear understanding of where individuals are falling short and can better address the root of the issue, while still respecting the dignity of choice and personal agency that the capabilities approach prioritizes. Ultimately, while the capabilities approach is heavily philosophy-based and provides more of a picture of what an ideal scale to measure poverty would look like, it is important to note that the modified version of the SPM takes this theoretical framework and applies it to an implementable plan. For instance, one capability on Martha Nussbaum's list is that of bodily health, which includes adequate nourishment and shelter. This can be quantified through the SPM's focus on access to FCSU. Using this as a proxy, the plan can generate accurate data and measurable trends, which in turn can inform new policies and address poverty at its root while still maintaining the dignity of all.
Regarding Rector's argument in his article, Air Conditioning, Cable TV, and Xbox, What is Poverty in the United States Today, is based on the perceived inaccuracies in the U.S. poverty measurement, the official poverty measure, the OPM. The OPM seems to show that the levels of poverty within America have stayed virtually unchanged. In the past few decades, many advancements have occurred, allowing for a higher standard of living within America today. Rector views this as proof that fewer people are in abject poverty. However, the ways Rector undermines the state of poverty in America today inaccurately reflects its severity. Rector's primary argument is built on two main points. One, Americans are doing better today than they were decades ago, and two, the state of American poverty is over-dramatized. To his first point, Rector reiterates that the average impoverished person owns items that the middle class from decades ago would not have been able to afford. Quote, today most poor families have conveniences that were unaffordable to the middle class not too long ago. However, what Rector fails to acknowledge is that the change of what are necessities over time. A primary example is cell phones. While even wealthy men at one point did not all own phones, phone culture was much less normative nor persistent as it is now. Phones have changed from a luxury to necessity. Secondly, Rector argues that the average impoverished American has the same standard of living as the typical European. Quote, the typical poor American has more living space than the average European. Rector dismisses the differences in overall day-to-day living between the U.S. and Europe, while to a typical European, having a car may be a luxury, it is a necessity to Americans due to our differences in access to public transportation and less walkable cities. Overall, Rector's material approach towards poverty measurement is entirely biased against impoverished Americans, who do not fall within his narrow view of poverty. The SPM seeks a much more encompassing approach, factoring in measurements beyond material goods.
Alternate poverty measures. While there are many other measurements for poverty, our modified SPM is still the best option. A measurement used in many affluent countries is the Relative Poverty Measure, or RPM. The RPM looks at income in a region, finds the median, and then designates those who make anything under half of median income to be impoverished. The RPM has never been adopted by the United States because it is relative, and the U.S. Census Bureau wanted a measurement that was not impacted by others' wealth, but instead on how much individuals are able to afford in a vacuum. Because of how relative this measurement is, it may not show everyone who is in poverty, and does not consider what life is like for those in that designation. Modified SPM, which considers multiple factors to ascertain whether or not households can afford what they need, is a much better measurement for poverty. The official poverty measurement, OPM, is the preferred method of poverty measurement by the U.S. Census Bureau. Originally founded in 1969 by Molly Orshansky, the OPM has remained the official method in the United States ever since. Though its longevity in theory helps aid in seeing trends of poverty in America, its inability to adapt to modern living habits and standards has made it unable to give an accurate reflection. The SPM, on the other hand, has adapted to modern living by updating its definitions for what it considers a family, extending beyond legal or blood definitions. Additionally, the SPM includes non-cash government methods that the OPM is unable to account for due to the fact that they did not exist when the OPM was initially enacted. Bye, and thank you for watching.